Welcome to Beat Diabetes. A lot of times when I respond to comments, I'll get to 2, 3, 4 different comments in one program. But in this case, I want to respond to just one comment and go into some detail about it. I think it's worth responding to. This individual asked politely. I have no criticism of how he asked or the language he used. I do have somewhat of a disagreement with the conclusions he drew. Let me just read what he says. I saw the results you described while eating low-carb I saw the results you described while eating low-carb. My fasting blood glucose was amazing, typically around 75 to 85 milligrams per deciliter. Eating things like eggs and butter would actually lower my blood glucose an hour later. So I'll tell you what, when you're getting into the 70s and 80s, and about the only time I ever see the 70s is if I've been doing a 36-hour fast, I may or may not see the 70s that final morning. But so he's doing very, very well. But he says, then I heard that it is fat itself that causes insulin resistance because it clogs up the insulin receptors in the cells. Well, that's a standard propaganda from the Whole Foods plant-based folks. They love to say that, oh, yeah, that fat is clogging everything up. And if you don't go plant-based, you're just going to be all clogged up and you're going to be insulin resistant. But if you do go totally plant foods, all will be well. And that doesn't explain why so many vegetarians and vegans end up getting diabetes, but that's another story. So this guy became convinced that I guess that's true. He says, after ending keto carnivore, I found this to be true. Eating a lean chicken breast with white rice and teriyaki sauce, approximately 1,000 calories. After fasting for 23 hours, my blood sugar spiked to 176 and then took several hours to come down. Now, that was when he was doing low carb. He says, but after a couple of weeks of eating the low-fat, moderate carb, moderate protein, my numbers started coming down on their own. No more spikes to 176. No more lingering around 120 to 140 hours later. I typically see a spike to 145, and then an hour or two is back down to around 105 to 115. Now, there's a big difference between an hour or two. Big difference. So he says, well, within an hour or two, I'm back down. An hour, I'd say if you're doing, if you're eating and you're back down after a meal in an hour, and you've got a good number, then you're doing great. If it's 2 hours, maybe not so great. So let's talk about this. Is there any significant advantage to going high carb so that you get less of a spike? And you can get less of a spike, and I'm going to explain that. But first, I want to go back in time to a video I made quite a number of years ago where I compared Cocoa Puffs cereal, little chocolate balls of wheat, versus granola. And so let's look at my numbers that I got in those days. Pre-meal, I was at 112 with the Cocoa Puffs. After 30 minutes, I was at 198. Now, that was my peak. An hour later, I was down to 182, so I'd already headed down 2 hours of 131. And what he's describing is within an hour or two, I get down pretty good. Well, if it's 1 hour, I say, yeah, you're doing pretty good. If it's 2 hours, I say that doesn't prove much. Because here in this Cocoa Puffs experiment, I was down to 131 in 2 hours. And if I didn't test before, and a lot of people, they get just angry, just furious with me when I suggest that they should test about an hour after they eat or an hour and 50 minutes after they eat. In this case, I was hitting my peak at 30 minutes after I ate. Here's what I found. The more sugar and white flour and unnatural a food product is, the more you'll tend to peak in a hurry. If you drink a soda, don't test yourself 2 hours after your soda, or you will conclude that soda is perfectly fine for me. It's 2 hours later and I'm down to 105. That doesn't prove anything. But notice with the Cocoa Puffs, at 30 minutes, I was at 198. I had bounced, what would that be? 86 points over 30 minutes. And then went down to 182 at 1 hour, 131. If I only looked at 2 hours, well, 131 wouldn't be ideal. But I would be saying, well, Cocoa Puffs isn't too bad. I managed to keep it within 140. If I didn't know, that's why I'm always concerned about my peaks. How high does that glucose go? Don't tell me about 2 hours. I know that's the standard. But if you want to know where you're peaking, and to me, that's the name of the game. That's where the game is won or lost. is keeping those peaks down. And here my peak was terrible. Now, with the granola, 110 pre-meal, 186 30 minutes, 172 1 hour, 2 hours, 168. Well, 168 is very, very bad at 2 hours, but it still doesn't tell the whole story. So if I only tested at 2 hours, I'd say, okay, granola, 168, not very good, but could be a lot worse. It was a lot worse. 186, the truth is there wasn't all that much difference between the granola and the Cocoa Puffs. Now, here's the problem. When you are eating high carb, high sugar, white floury type of foods, or even brown flour, whole wheat flour, and you're bouncing up there pretty good at 1 hour, you don't just have a problem with high glucose. You've got a problem with high insulin. You can bet, looking at my Cocoa Puff scores, when I was up to 198, my pancreas was puffing away. Now, if I had a failed pancreas, if I was a type 1 or a type 2 in the very last stages where the pancreas is about to fail down to where it can't do anything, then my pancreas wouldn't be putting out too much insulin. But my pancreas was putting out a lot of insulin, and that's why it came down to 131 after 2 hours. Now, what most of the people will tell you that are into the high-carb diet, usually they're the whole foods, plant-based folks, and a lot of cases, they're into nutrition. They think nutrition is everything there is to be concerned about. If I can just get enough vitamin C, if I can just get enough vitamin D, if I can just get enough calcium and niacin and all the stuff that fruits and vegetables give me, I'll be good. So they don't ever concern themselves with what is my glucose, and they never even think about how much insulin is my pancreas forced to put out. Now, one thing we've discovered is that high insulin is a problem all by itself. And if you are creating a condition with high insulin, then you've got problems. And let me just share a few quotes from different sources. Here's the PubMed website, which says, because of the largely unrestricted insulin signaling, hyperinsulinemia increases the risk of obesity, type 2 diabetes, and cardiovascular disease, and decreases health span and life expectancy. What does all this nasty work? It's insulin. High insulin levels. You may be saying, I'm confused, Dennis. I thought insulin is what diabetics need. If you're a type 2, chances are you've got more insulin than you need going on right now. In fact, you've got too much along with high glucose. All right, let's get to another source, levelshealth.com, that gives metabolic insights. They write this: in the latter case, high glycemic variability, which basically means spikes, up and down, up and down, up and down every meal, and chronically high glucose levels, that's where you're not really spiking too much, you're just staying up all the time. So either way, you're bouncing up and down way high and then pretty low and then way high and then pretty low. That's the variability. Or you're just high all the time, which is really what will probably happen in the last stages of type 2 diabetes. They say they cause repeated surges of insulin. Repeated surges of insulin. That's what you do not want. As cells are exposed to more and more of the hormone, they become less and less sensitive to it. This numbing effect can impact you in diverse ways because almost every cell in your body has insulin receptors, and it can take hold surprisingly quickly. In one study, for instance, researchers forced insulin levels to stay high in a group of 15 healthy people who were previously insulin sensitive. They became more insulin resistant after just 48 hours of this treatment. So they were giving strong high insulin levels in the body artificially and turning people from insulin sensitive to insulin resistant, basically creating diabetics in about 48 hours. Now that's incredible. Now, if they stopped, I'm sure they would revert. But they're making the point that when you get too much insulin, you will eventually become diabetic. The famous quote by Michael and Mary Eads from their book Protein Power In the appropriate amount, insulin keeps the metabolic system humming along smoothly with everything in balance. In great excess, it becomes a rogue hormone ranging throughout the body, wreaking metabolic havoc and leaving a trail of chaos and disease in its wake. What they're saying is in normal levels, yeah, insulin is great. You got to have it. It's important. It's a wonder hormone for sure. But when it goes too high, then you got real problems. And it becomes a rogue hormone, doing incredible damage to your body. The Cleveland Clinic website lists these as a result of having too much insulin in your body: obesity, metabolic syndrome, polycystic ovary syndrome, higher triglyceride levels, high uric acid, hardening of the arteries, which leads to cardiovascular events, high blood pressure. All of these things coming from just too much insulin. Now, guess what? If you go to your doctor and you say, "Doc, I want some blood work done. I want to see what's going on in my body," you may well get an A1C. You'll definitely get a cholesterol test of some kind and results about your cholesterol, your triglycerides, and they'll tell you a number of other things. Most likely, you'll get no test that involves your insulin levels. You won't know whether you've got high insulin or low insulin or medium insulin. So the average person has no clue as to where their insulin level is. But from everything we are learning, high insulin is just about as big a problem as high glucose. And it will almost always come first. First, you'll get the high insulin, and then eventually your pancreas will wear out and you'll have the high glucose. So, let me just give you some quick points about too much insulin. And all this is coming from this question where the guy says, well, I decided to eat a higher carb diet and I found out that my blood sugar didn't seem to spike as high. Well, the reason for that is your pancreas has a memory. It knows, it remembers what you've been eating lately, the last several days. So when you eat a high carb meal, if you've been eating low carb, it just assumes this is another low carb meal. And then suddenly the glucose starts to go up and then your pancreas is like, whoa, I wasn't expecting this. And then it starts dumping out the insulin. You end up with high glucose and high insulin. So yeah, if your body is used to eating low carb and then you eat a baked potato, you can bet you'll have a pretty good spike. That doesn't really prove too much. So, point number one, consistently high insulin levels are dangerous. They are unhealthy, abnormal, just wrong, and you may well not know it. In fact, my guess is that most of America is walking around every day with high insulin levels. Point number two, the biggest reason for high insulin levels are A, insulin resistance, and B, a high carbohydrate diet. So, and there is a vicious cycle because the more insulin in your body, the more insulin resistant you become. And the more insulin resistant you become, the more insulin you'll have in your body. And it'll go back and forth between too much insulin and insulin resistance until finally you're just a walking time bomb of high insulin and suddenly your pancreas just gives out. Point number three, high insulin levels lead to increased insulin resistance. We made that point. Number four, whatever you can do to lower insulin levels is going to be beneficial. Let me say that again. Whatever you can do to lower your insulin levels is going to be beneficial. Number five, only a type 1 diabetic or a failing type 2 diabetic can have high glucose levels and not have high insulin levels. If you're a type 2 and your pancreas is not totally failing, you can bet if you've got high glucose, you've got high insulin levels. And all you have to do is look at your glucose meter after you test yourself. If you test yourself like I did on the Cocoa Puffs, and I had a 198 an hour, or 30 minutes rather, after I ate the cereal, you can bet I had high insulin, and I did. So if your glucose meter is reading 180, 200, 250, 300, you can bet you got way too much insulin going on. Number six, people who only emphasize vitamin and nutrition and pay no attention to high insulin levels are missing an important key to good health. If There are some people, all they think about is, I want more vitamins and more minerals and more vitamins and more minerals. And if I get enough vitamins and if I get enough minerals, I'll fix every problem I've got. Meanwhile, high insulin and high glucose are doing a number on you. They're beating you to death. And all you're worried about is more vitamin C or more calcium or more vitamin this and vitamin that. Imagine seeing a young man getting beaten up by a bully. He's just getting beat to death, just terribly beaten. He's bloody, he's bruised, he's just a mess. This guy's too tough for him. He can't handle him. And someone wants to help him. They throw him a vitamin C bottle and say, take this vitamin C and this will fix your problem. No. When you're getting beat by a bully, you need more than some vitamin C. You need to be able to defend yourself. And when you've got diabetes and you've got the high glucose and the high insulin, you're getting beaten by a bully. And the idea that if I just take enough vitamin C, if I just eat enough salads, if I just eat enough bananas and mangoes and cherries, everything is going to fix itself. Wrong. That's not the answer. First, beat the bully through a low-carbohydrate, time-restricted eating program, 2 meals a day, both low-carb, stop your snacking. Beat that bully, smash him to the ground, make him go home crying to mama. And then if you want to learn how to incorporate more nutrition in your diet, so be it, as long as it's nutrition coming from foods that are not outrageously high in sugar and carbohydrates. If you've recently been diagnosed with diabetes and you've just discovered this channel, let me recommend that you go to our Uploads page, which will give you access to every diabetic video we've posted since we began. As you work your way through all our videos, I believe you'll find the help you need. A link to our Uploads page is in the description.